Excalibur was directed by John Boorman and written by Boorman and Rospo Pallenberg, which depicts the life of the mythical figure of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. In a way, the movie also tells the tale of the sword, Excalibur, and how it unites a whole land. Boorman had wanted to do a Merlin film ever since 1969, but the project was deemed too expensive to shoot, and instead, United Artists offered him the rights to make Lord of the Rings. Eventually, Boorman came back to his original idea. Boorman's Excalibur is not a film that strives to be realistic or down to earth. Rather, it's based on myths and stories during Arthur's life. Throughout the film, there are many recognizable mythical images and icons like the Sword in the Stone, the Round Table, and the quest for the Holy Grail. The movie itself isn't talked about too much these days, but many of the film's fans say that this movie is the best interpretation of King Arthur on screen, which I wholeheartedly agree with. I do also think that the film is an underrated fantasy gem that I think people would really like given the chance. This is Excalibur. The film's story is rich with material and arguably messy at points. The film is centered around Arthur's life. The first act of the film tells the story of Arthur's birth and him pulling the sword from the stone. The second act details the glory days of Camelot and of the Knights of the Round Table. The third act is about the quest of the Holy Grail and about the last days of Arthur's life. So much happens in this 2.5-hour film that it doesn't feel that long, and there's always something happening on screen. John Boorman was able to balance everything well and pace the movie so the events wouldn't feel jumbled together. Although it does take a couple watches to fully understand everything that happens, you can't just look at your phone while watching this or else you'll miss something. I love that the film captures all of this in just one movie. It adds to how special and unique the film is for trying something like this. Some movies that have had a similar source material tend to only focus on one specific event from that material instead of getting the big picture. Anyways, with these videos, I'm going to try to talk about 2 or 3 scenes that really stick out to me. I think it would be better to do that instead of talking about the whole plot of the movie, which can be read on Wikipedia anyways. The first scene that I'll go over is the knighting of Arthur. This happens after Arthur has pulled the sword from the stone, and he gathers some men to defend Sir Leon Grace's castle. There are a couple of knights who reject Arthur as the rightful king because of his young age, including Sir Uriens. Arthur and his men are able to defend the castle. Soon, Arthur and Uriens come face to face. Arthur at first demands that Uriens join him, but the knight refuses. Arthur then humbles himself and states that Uriens will knight him. The scene is still after that as Uriens takes Arthur's sword and raises it above him. You're not sure what will happen as Uriens battles with himself on what to do. It's just a great moment of tension, and even the character of Merlin is caught up in it. Finally, Uriens decides to do what's right and knights Arthur. He does this because of how Arthur is similar to the previous king, who was indeed his father. I also love the music in the scene too. It starts off with this very eerie sound, then when Uriens knights Arthur, it turns into the Excalibur theme. The scene is also shot perfectly, as I do agree with the choice to shoot the scene with medium and medium close-up shots mostly. The second sequence that's worth talking about is Arthur and Lancelot's Joust in fight, which is then followed up by the Lady in the Lake scene. I really love the dialogue in this movie. It has this old, noble tone about it. The dialogue feels like it came out from a book that was published hundreds or so years ago, with very formal and interesting sentences. It's really direct, and there's absolutely no subtlety in it.
And I have yet to find a king worthy of my sword.
That is a wild boast. You lack a knight's humility.
Not a boast, sir, but a curse. For I have never met my match in joust or duel.
Overside!
I will not. You must retreat, or prove your worth in the test of arms under the eyes of God.
Then may he give me the strength to unhorse you, and send you with one blow back across the sea.
Then come across, sir.
Arthur and Lancelot agree to joust, and I love the scene. I've never seen a joust on film except for this movie, so it's pretty awesome to watch. Arthur refuses to back down when Lancelot knocks Arthur off his horse. The fight continues with swords and clubs. The fight is pretty brutal, but at the same time has this clumsiness to it. I've heard that John Boorman didn't really spend too much time choreographing the fights in this movie, but I do like how realistic it is with the heavy armor and weapons slowing every action that you would take. It's clear that Lancelot is the superior warrior as he kicks Arthur's ass, and Arthur can only get a couple of hits in at best. Eventually, Arthur is beaten down, and Lancelot is about to finish the main character off when Arthur calls on Excalibur's power to win him the fight. It does this, but the sword is broken up in the process. Arthur is stunned and is in shock of what had happened. He throws the sword in the lake. This is a great moment for the character, as Arthur realizes his mistakes, and immediately regrets using the power of the sword to win a fight rather than to unite and inspire the people of the kingdom.
I've lost, for all time, the ancient sword of my fathers, whose power was meant to unite all men, not to serve the vanity of a single man. I am nothing.
Nigel Terry plays Arthur, and he's perfect in the role, as this scene is one of the best in the movie. The regret and sadness really comes through in his performance. I especially like how he says, "I am nothing." Even Merlin is shocked that the sword is broken and doesn't know what to do. Suddenly, the mysterious Lady of the Lake appears, and she has apparently been able to fix the sword. Merlin is overwhelmed and asks Arthur to take the new Excalibur. Arthur quickly jumps in and takes the sword from her. The thing that really sells this scene is the music. The music cue, Lady of the Lake, is a highlight to Trevor Jones's score, and the tone is really eerie and mysterious, as it should be. Overall, the sequence is very memorable to me, and it's so well acted, shot, and directed. The last set of scenes that I think should be talked about is when Percival discovers the Holy Grail and is able to get it. The way the Grail is depicted in the film is pretty interesting because it seems like the only way to be able to attain the Grail is to have it presented to you in a near-death experience. Percival and his fellow knights of the Round Table have searched for the Grail for 10 years. The Grail disappeared when Arthur had his bastard son Mordred, which was against his will, and the land and Arthur were both cursed. Percival encounters the Grail 2 times. The first time he sees it, he doesn't know what the answer is to the questions that are being asked. He returns and is able to solve the riddle by saying that the land and Arthur are one. I like how Percival doesn't know the answer to the question at first. The questions are, what is the secret of the Grail, and who does it serve? This sequence really shows how good of a knight Percival is. He has a strong will and went through great lengths to find the Grail. He's a true example of what it takes to be a knight of the Round Table. The Grail itself is a prime representation of faith and the hope that everything will be restored to how it was. Again, the scene is shot and lit very well. The scene feels surreal with the help of this great whitish blue lighting that gives it this feeling. Alex Thompson was the DP on this movie, and he did a fantastic job in capturing the essence of medieval times and the chivalry of Camelot. He was also nominated for an Oscar for Best Cinematography. Too bad this movie lost that year. The effects in that scene also follow the same rule of surrealism. The Grail seems to be composited over the footage. After Percival is able to get the Grail, he gives it to Arthur, who drinks it and is reborn. The land and Arthur are both affected by this. The land begins to blossom and regain what it had lost. This is shown by a scene that shows both the land and Arthur being reborn. It's a great sequence where we see Arthur and the knights riding out to battle against Mordred's evil forces. Carl Orff's O Fortuna is played during this scene and really adds to how big of a deal the revitalization is and how great it is. The close-up shots of Arthur are pretty badass, and you can see that he's ready for battle. There are many other scenes that are worth discussion, but I thought that these 3 sequences were the best to talk about for this video. The cast is filled by a number of notable upcoming stars, which include Helen Mirren, Patrick Stewart, and Liam Neeson, who all went to have great careers after this movie. Nigel Terry plays Arthur. It's perfect casting in my opinion. He plays Arthur with 3 distinct variations. At first he plays the younger version of the character. This is probably the weakest part of the performance because he was in his 30s at this time and was trying to play the character who was in the teens. He's much better once Arthur is king and is at the appropriate age. Terry's voice is what really makes his interpretation stand out. It really helps once Arthur is an old man. There, Nigel Terry makes the character his own. Nicole Williamson plays Merlin, and he also gives a memorable performance as he plays the role in a more charismatic way than other interpretations of the role have done in the past and the present. It adds to how much Williamson makes his performance stand out compared to the other actors who play the role. Merlin can be pretty damn threatening in one scene, really wise and thoughtful in another, just plain crazy. Then he can be banging his head in a comedic way in another. Williamson really sells this interpretation and switches between all these character traits and moods with ease. My favorite Merlin scene in this movie is when he's talking to Arthur about the future and is disappointed when Arthur really isn't listening to him. He's kind of like, whatever, he'll find out. Also, I think the scene where Merlin says that evil is where you never expect it to be, where the Knights of the Round Table are discussing good and evil in their time. It's great foreshadowing to when Morgana will betray Arthur, and overall it's just a good philosophical discussion in that scene. Arthur had to believe that evil had forever been taken care of ever since there had been peace for many years. But Merlin cleverly says that there isn't good without evil, evil without good, which is kind of a recurring theme throughout the film and in many other movies. Even if there are no enemies to fight, there's always something wrongful or unjust that happens. This is made clear when the wars come to an end and Morgana uses Sir Gawain to accuse Guinevere of betraying Arthur. Anyways, Nicole Williamson was great in the role. The rest of the cast performed well and really adds to the overall quality of the film. The cinematography by Alex Thompson was excellent, and I really love every shot that's in the movie. Thompson would often light the scene with green lighting to give it that certain fantasy look to it. There are a couple scenes that incorporate mist really well, which helps with how chaotic and crazy battle can get at points. One of the best scenes that was shot, in my opinion, is the wedding between Arthur and Guinevere. The way that Thompson uses medium and long shots throughout really adds to the grandness and formalness to the scene. Thompson should have won that Oscar. The costumes in the film are also top-notch. The armor that the knights wear look real, and the swords actually bounce off armor in combat. I also really like the darker armor that Arthur wears during his fight with Lancelot. The knights have the classic silver-plated look that you would associate with knights in medieval times. The dresses that the female characters wear are also very majestic and match well with the medieval times. Also, the golden armor that Mordred wears and the helmet that he has makes me hate his character even more. Good job, costume department. The production design also includes some good looking sets. The best would probably have to be Arthur's castle, Mordred's lair, and Merlin's place in the Land of Dreams. All of these sets have their own look to them that emphasize the characters that live and work there. The mise-en-scène is incorporated well throughout the movie, and the best aspect of that is probably the sets, costumes, and blocking of certain scenes. The action scenes in this movie may not be choreographed as well as they should be, but I do like how realistic and clumsy it can get. The music by Trevor Jones is great and really adds to the film. So does Carl Orff's and Richard Wagner's classic works. Those were great choices, and it was a smart move to just use those pieces instead of hiring a composer to try to do the same thing and replicate it. I mean, if it worked for Stanley Kubrick for 2001, it can work for this. Overall, Excalibur is a great fantasy movie that is really a hidden gem that more people need to check out if they love Lord of the Rings or the fantasy genre in general. In my opinion, John Boorman made a masterpiece.